Fox News alert violence surging in major cities like Chicago, Minneapolis, and New York over the weekend amid the growing push to defund the police. And in Seattle's CHOP protest zone, one 19-year-old man shot and killed and another person injured. This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis. Here today is Fox Business anchor Dagan McDowell, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network Kennedy, syndicated radio host and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, and joining us today, Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. Leslie, I want to pick up on that point that Kennedy made there about people say one thing and they vote another. We certainly learned that in the last presidential election. There were people clearly who voted for President Trump who didn't admit it to their friends or didn't say it when they were polled. I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing is going on right now when people call on the phone and say, do the polling and say, who are you going to vote for? They look at pictures like this, they think about voting for President Trump, but they tell those pollsters the opposite. Do you think that's happening?
No, I don't think it's going to be a repeat of 2016, and for a few reasons. Melissa, look, people in Seattle, in that area especially, say it's an entirely different scenario between day and night. And when you add to that alcohol, when you add to that, not just in Seattle, but across the country, more than 2 million additional gun owners and guns on the street, and add to that, in some states, violent offenders that have been released from prison, that's a powder keg. That's a recipe for a disaster. Certainly, there'll be people that are in or near areas like we see in the CHOP district in Seattle that might vote differently than they say. I don't think that's going to be the situation across the board, especially because polls also strongly show that Americans are in favor of reformation of police departments, are in favor of what happened with the protest. And I think so many people saw for themselves what happened with Mr. Floyd and really feel that there's a systemic problem in this country that needs to be addressed. And what we've done in the past has not done that, so we need something different and perhaps someone different in the future.
Meanwhile, Minnesota failing to pass a police reform bill after weeks of negotiations in its split state legislature. Yeah. I don't know, Leslie, do you want to respond to that? Because as I said, my neighbor was held up at gunpoint here in New York City, in a city where, as Dagan has pointed out many times, it is nearly impossible to get your hands on a gun. Still, they were able to do that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't agree with Charlie. I think, there is a correlation here. I mean, you have more guns on the street legally obtained. And we don't know in Seattle, for example, or until people are arrested in New York City and other cities, who has those guns and how they obtained those guns. You guys talked about Chicago. I lived in Chicago 4 years. You know what? If you Google the statistics of the numbers over this weekend, the highest numbers of shootings this past weekend in Chicago, you had those same numbers in 2018. So not all of this has to do with COVID. Not all of this has to do with protest or the murder of Mr. Floyd. Kennedy had talked about with people sitting down and talking, and I agree. The problem is in Minneapolis and Minnesota specifically, they weren't able to do that. To Charlie's point, both sides want to be up for re-election, but the protesters are expecting something different going forward, and what they did in Minnesota is showing no change at all.
Chuck Schumer calling on the DOJ's Inspector General to probe Attorney General Barr's removal of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York after a dramatic standoff that began Friday night. That is when Barr announced U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman would step down. Hours later, Berman said he would do no such thing. On Saturday, Barr said that President Trump had fired Berman, who then did step down, even as the president denied being involved in firing him. New York's Southern District is currently investigating President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and has obtained indictments against 2 of Giuliani's associates. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham says he believes the president has the right to fire Berman, but says he won't take up the president's nomination for replacement unless New York's 2 Democratic senators, Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, sign off on it. So, Leslie, so Berman he was temporary, was my understanding, and then he was in for a while, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm butchering the right way to say this, but he was then voted to stay in his position at this point, but now he's being replaced by someone, at least temporarily, who, by all accounts, is just as dogged and just as focused and is right in on all the same cases. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's exactly why the Attorney General wanted his guy Jay Clayton to be somebody who has no experience as a prosecutor and somebody who's loyal to him. I think what the Attorney General is doing is what many Democrats, quite frankly, have accused him of, which is having Trumpian tendencies. And I say that with regard to, if you're loyal to me, you're on my team, I want you on my team. I mean, the president has said, I have nothing to do with this. So was he fired? And, and to your point, Melissa, and also to Kennedy's point, what was the reason for this? I mean, if anybody else, I mean, certainly Mr. Berman needs to know that, as well as those in Congress and as well as the American people. This smells. And to Kennedy's point, if this had been during the Obama administration, you took the words out of my mouth, Kennedy, absolutely, there would be outrage. This is a problem. Is the Attorney General looking for the best person, man or woman, for the job, or somebody loyal to him, as we've seen the president do?
Biden's senior campaign advisor Simone Sanders facing some tough questions from our very own Chris Wallace on why the presumptive Democratic nominee has not held a formal news conference in nearly 3 months. Here, the former vice president has hosted some virtual events amid the coronavirus pandemic, but has not fielded questions from the National Press Corps, either in person or online. All right, so Leslie, what can the vice president do to bolster his image with voters who, I know there aren't very many of them, it certainly doesn't seem like it, but voters who might be on the fence? Is staying away from reporters really the best strategy? And would you advise this is what the vice president continues to do?
Well, if I were to advise him, Kennedy, you look at what's happening right now, and it's working. I mean, he's tied with the president in Arkansas. There are rumors that Georgia will flip blue. National polls here at Fox and other places show him between 10 and 14 percentage points ahead. Now, I know everybody will say, Melissa, I know it's saying I believe polls. 2016 definitely taught us something different regarding polls. Joe Biden isn't just leading by example, but I mentioned last week he has left his basement. He met with George Floyd's family. He was kneeling and talking with protesters, but he is taking questions from reporters, not just, as Simone said, not just from local media, but from national media as well. I don't think he is intentionally trying to avoid the press. I think he is trying to do what the CDC is saying to do, and in the future we'll see that change. But right now, what he is doing is working for him.
And that was a big problem for Hillary. Okay, so Charlie, what about that?
This is a very different election, and very different election,
right,
very different time, very different candidates.
Yes.
President Trump today urging one of his biggest critics, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to challenge another one of his biggest critics, Chuck Schumer, for his New York Senate seat, saying it would be, quote, a big improvement and that she'd likely win. The freshman Congresswoman raising a whopping $10.5 million and hiring nearly 40 staffers for her reelection bid. The haul makes her the fifth highest fundraiser of this cycle so far. Leslie, let me start with you. So she's raised a ton of money. She's spent a ton of money, more than any House Democrat seeking re-election, $6.3 million. She has 40 staffers, which is more the size of a Senate campaign. She is also facing a primary challenger tomorrow, Michelle Caruso-Cabrera. What do you think are the reasons for her staffing up and spending so big? Is it that challenger, or is she eyeing the Senate seat?
I think it's the challenger. I think she wants to secure the seat that she has. I think that although she has a very powerful voice, obviously, and a very large following, she also knows that maybe she's not ready, and I don't want to say for prime time, she certainly is a House member, but ready for the Senate. Quite frankly, the majority of Democrats are moderates. We've seen that in 2016 with the Democratic nominee being Hillary Clinton, and then again now in 2020 with Joe Biden becoming the Democratic nominee. She is of the Bernie Sanders camp, the far left progressive faction of the Democratic Party, which didn't succeed in 2016, didn't succeed in 2020, does not reflect the majority of Democrats in the country or in the state of New York. So no, I don't think she'll go for it. And I don't think she should. And I understand why the president's baiting her to do so. It would be further division in the party and less things Democrats could try to get done.
The White House announcing that President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump will host a Salute to America on July the 4th at the White House with music, military demonstrations, and fireworks. This despite pushback from 10 Democratic lawmakers in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., who wrote in a letter to administration officials last month, given the current COVID-19 crisis, we believe such an event would needlessly risk the health and safety of thousands of Americans. Further, this event would come at the cost of millions of taxpayer dollars, while we're facing an unprecedented economic downturn due to the pandemic. Leslie, this party, this celebration, it's going to be on the South Lawn of the White House, and then the Ellipse, which is before you get to Constitution Avenue. So it's not going to be on the Mall. It's not this grand celebration.
A couple of things. Actually, to Charlie's point, do you care more about being reelected or do you care more about the country? You have in the District of Columbia, where this is being held, stay-at-home orders still in place, also in Virginia and Maryland. You have thousands of people that have died from this. We have over 1 million people that now have COVID. We have these protests. We do have looting and violence. That's what the president should be addressing. Not our country is great. We do want to make it greater, but these things need to be addressed in order for us to be greater. Don't waste the taxpayers' dollars to give a perception that everything's fine when it isn't.
Thank you, everybody. Charlie, Leslie, Kennedy. Thanks to everybody for joining us.